Let's talk about 2nd and 3rd John. So these two books are the shortest books of the New Testament. 3rd John is slightly shorter if you go by word count. They're both written in 85 to 90 AD, so at the end of the New Testament era, the last few books that are written together with Revelation and probably 1st John. 3rd John is written to an individual, Gaius, and that individual by name we can recognize, okay, a particular person. 2nd John's a little bit different. We read that 2nd John is addressed to the elect lady and her children. And so the question becomes, is this a particular lady as in an individual, like Gaius, but female? And here in verse 5, I beseech thee, lady. Or are we looking at a way of describing the church or referring to a church as the elect lady? One of the pieces of information that can help us there, when we get to the end of the book, we read, the children of thy elect sister greet thee. And so the connection or the use of language now, your sister, gives us a little bit of indication. I would be inclined to think we're talking here about churches. And another piece of support for that argument is that you can see a lot of family relationship language in 1 John. John talking to the believers as his children, little children, fathers, young men, children. And I think when I put that together, I'm comfortable with an idea here that he's referring to the church using the metaphor, the picture of a lady. But if someone wants to understand this as an individual, it doesn't make that much of a difference really on the interpretation, and I'm comfortable with either one. What is more notable and definitely worth paying attention to would be all of the overlaps between 2nd John and 1st John. Now, there are ties in 3rd John as well. All of John's books have some echoes of each other, but 2nd John and 1st John are particularly strong, significantly more so, say, than 3rd John. And I'll just look through 2nd John with you quickly. It's not a very long book, so we can get through most of it just looking through. We'll recognize right away some of the patterns as we proceed. So here is language, whom I love in truth. Also, all they that have known the truth, for the truth's sake. And we're going to come back to that later, the discussion of the truth. But this is a very majored idea in 2nd John. We see Trinitarian language here that reminds us of details in 1st John. Here's rejoicing that we see in 1st John as well. A commandment from the Father, that sounds like language in 1st John. Here is a passage that sounds like it could have been lifted right out of 1st John. I'm writing you not as though I write a new commandment unto you, but that which we had from the beginning, that we love one another. This comes up explicitly in 1 John 2 and 1 John 4. This is a very, very explicit tie to the book. And this is love, that we walk after his commandments. This is the commandment that, as you've heard from the beginning, you should walk in it. I mean, really, you could actually get mixed up and think you were in 1 John. Similarly here, this is language that comes up in 1 John chapter 4. Many deceivers are entered into the world. They confess not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an antichrist, or a pseudo-Christ, a false Christ. And here, verse 9, whoever transgresseth and abideth not in the doctrine of Christ hath not God. He that abideth in the doctrine of Christ, he hath both the Father and the Son. Again, that could be lifted right out of 1 John. And finally, the conclusion of the book, he is going to give us just a few more details that remind us of 1 John language, talking about the doctrine here and talking about our joy may be full. Both of those are phrases that we can find in 1 John. All the same, there are differences. And this is now going to take me in the direction of noticing some patterns, some really striking patterns that are more or less unique to 2nd John and 3rd John. So what I want to highlight are the words truth and love. Truth and love as patterns or as themes that are at the central core of the theology of these two epistles. First, let's see the themes and let's just recognize where they're at. So we see things like this, whom I love in the truth. It's love, which is an expression of personal sacrifice for someone, even an emotion, but it's love connected to truth. They're not separated. Love and truth together. Also, all they that have known the truth. Here is grace to all of you through Jesus Christ in truth and love. I rejoice that I find my children walking in truth. Verse 5, here's a command that we love one another. This is love, that we walk after his commandments. And moving now to 3 John, I've just moved between the two books, but I just want you to notice how similar they are in this respect. Gaius, whom I love in the truth. That's exactly the way he introduced 2 John. The brethren came and testified of the truth, that you walk in the truth. I rejoice to hear that my children walk in truth. We therefore desire to be fellow helpers of the truth itself, yes, and our record is true. And in each one of these cases, what we're getting is the pattern with both of those two themes, truth and love combined. The pattern is distinctly Johannine or John language. John likes to talk a lot about two sides or two tensions, but this is different. In this case, these are not in tension as in these are pulling against each other, God and the world, or light and darkness. These are not opposites. These are not polarities. This is a pair that works together. And actually, the thesis point of 2nd and 3rd John is that it is possible to have, to live, and to exercise both truth and love at the same time. Now, how does that work itself out specifically in the theology of the book? You could talk, and we could talk through some of the theological foundations that are quite similar to 1 John, in the sense that we see some of the themes we already talked about. Your expression of love for God is evident in your obeying his commandments. It's evident in your having true doctrine. And so those kinds of ideas are linked to say true love for God means that you love his truth. You don't just love God as a feeling, as an emotion, without being able to say who God is or what makes him unique or why you love him. It's defining. There is a doctrine of Christ. And you love him, the one who is described by that doctrine. But what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to focus on the distinct application or the practical command that 2 John gives us. Let me show you what that is. It's 2 John 10. If there come any unto you and bring not this doctrine. Okay, so there's a truth component to this. Remember in 1 John we had tests, and there are specific doctrines that define Christianity. Christianity is not just a feeling, an idea. It is a specific set of doctrinal statements or propositions. If any comes to you without that set of doctrinal propositions, or this truth, this gospel, do not receive him into your house, neither bid him Godspeed. He that biddeth him Godspeed is partaker of his evil deeds. You know, that's interesting because what we've gotten in the book is truth and love, right? And what I've gotten there in terms of an expression in relationship to this person strikes me, at least initially, as the opposite of love. Somebody comes, they're looking for help, they're looking for encouragement. By the bidding him Godspeed, we're probably looking at like practical encouragement, somebody giving a gift or supporting them or encouraging them in their work. And so the person comes around looking for help or encouragement, and John says, don't help them. And that in a book that focuses on love. So how would that work? And the answer is, legitimately, there is an expression of love that says, I look at someone teaching false ideas, I'm horrified by it. I realize what that does to the insides of people. I realize how destructive and corroding those ideas are. And my expression then of love for God, love for the truth, and yes, love for people, is that I look at a person like that and I say, I'm not touching it, not helping, not encouraging. I'm not in favor of what you're doing. Not everyone who claims to be a Christian actually carries the true gospel of Jesus Christ. Not everyone who claims to be a minister of God. Not everyone who's helping people in a physical sense is necessarily a true servant of God. What's the test? John is going to say it explicitly. If they come not bringing this doctrine, there is a doctrinal measure of whether someone is actually a person that you ought to help in terms of the ministry. Now, 2 John is going to do a similar thing, but it's going to flip it around a little bit. And what's interesting about 3 John is that we're going to get two examples kind of two specific test cases that are going to show us the contrast here. So if we move to 3 John, we'll notice first Diotrephes. Diotrephes, who loves to have their preeminence among them, receives us not. And so if I come, I will remember his deeds, the one who attacks us with malicious words, the one who does not receive the brethren, who forbids them that would, who casts them out of the church. This is not good. This person is not good. And in fact, his argument in verse 11, he that doeth good is of God, he that doeth evil hath not seen God. And in context, this, applied back to the rest of the paragraph, would really be saying Diotrephes has shown by his conduct that he has not seen God. That's the argument. But then there's an interesting turn. Here's a positive turn. Demetrius has a good report of all men and of the truth itself. I think the concept of having a good report of the truth itself is that if he goes against the test of the gospel or the test of Jesus' teaching or the test of the New Testament teaching, then he passes. He shows through his life that he has been changed. And what you've got then is a contrast between two different kinds of people. A person who is not faithful and ought then to be rejected, and a person who is faithful and then ought to be supported. But there's more. And notice the specific charges against Diotrephes. Among the many other things he does, I mean, you see his deeds, you see him prating against us with malicious words, you see him casting people out of the church. But why? And sewn through here, or woven through it, is this language, he receiveth us not. He actually does not himself receive the brethren, and he forbids other people that would, meaning he forbids other people that would receive the brethren. So whatever this receive the brethren language is, it's pretty important. What does that mean? And the answer is we go a little bit earlier in the book and we find another practical command or an application that John is giving us regarding that very question. So we find this language in verse 5. Thou doest faithfully whatever you do to the brethren and to strangers. In other words, to help brethren and strangers, that's an expression of faithfulness, which that expression of faithfulness has borne witness of your charity before the church, your love before the church. And that's our concept of love and truth again. What so, or how so? How would you do that? If you bring people forward on their journey, people after a godly sort, then you will do well. Because that for his name's sake, for the name of Jesus, they went forth, taking nothing of the Gentiles, taking nothing of the nations. Wherefore we ought to receive such, so that we might be fellow helpers to the truth. Okay, do you remember 2 John? And the argument of 2 John, if a person comes to you and they do not bear this doctrine, the true doctrine, don't receive them, meaning don't support them, don't help them, don't bid them Godspeed, don't give them encouragement, whether financial, verbal, or otherwise. You're looking at their teaching and you're saying, well, your teaching is not really of Christ, therefore you are not of Christ, therefore I do not support your work, and I'm not part of, oh, well, you claim to help people. No, but do you proclaim the true doctrine of Jesus Christ? There is a doctrinal test. Well, 3 John is just extending that same thing out now, where 2 John was giving the negative, don't help people who carry a false doctrine. 3 John is giving the positive. If a person comes to you and they bear this true doctrine, they are people who bring after a godly sort, or for his name's sake, they go out. And they have no other kind of supply, no other sort of support. We therefore ought to receive such. Receiving meaning help them, that we might be fellow helpers to the truth. And that's precisely the charge that's made against Diotrephes. What proves that he's not faithful is that he's a person who does not receive the apostles, does not receive other brethren who are faithful, forbids other people from helping them. Okay, so if I'm putting those pieces together, what is the argument of 3 John? The basic argument goes that to love the truth is to love those who bear the truth. To love the truth is to help those who carry and spread the truth. The argument of 2 John is, again, to love the truth is to refuse to help those who confuse or distort the truth. And in fact, then, love for people and love for truth follow some of the same channels. By loving the truth, There are certain people that I must seek to help and encourage and to enable and support. And by loving the truth as well, there are certain people I must not support because these are people who work counter to the truth. If I can draw from this idea, go back to an idea that appeared in 2 John and actually goes even further back into 1 John, you can see part of the reason why. Many deceivers are entered into the world, people who do not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. These people are deceivers, and they're actually pseudo-Christs. And the argument of it all goes that there are people who carry a false doctrine, a pseudo-gospel, claiming to be ministers of Christ, and as such actually pseudo-false Christ. And for such people, we do not help. Why? Because we love the truth. But for people who carry the true gospel, we do all that we can to become, as 3 John says, fellow sharers or fellow workers in the truth. Of course, I highlighted earlier the themes of truth and love at the beginning of both books. Notably here, 3 John 1, whom I love in the truth. And I argued that though these are a pair, and kind of not really in tension, but they're a pair that move together throughout the books. My point was that they're different. They're not like light and darkness in that they pull apart from each other. They move together, whom I love in the truth. They share, they move together as one. And yet there is kind of a balancing between them. And I'll just end with this thought, to recognize that the way that you love must be in truth. In other words, there's kind of a pseudo-love that says, well, I'm just going to accept everyone as they are with no criticism. It's not really love, because to love someone deeply is to care about their well-being, which now requires some commitments, some previous commitments to truth. There's also a kind of pseudo-truth on the other side, a person who is such a warrior for truth that they forget that they're dealing with people, that these are human beings, these are lives, these are people who take breaths and who have heartbeats and eventually won't take breaths and won't have heartbeats. And that this then is the highest possible cost. It's a very serious thing, human beings. And I think the richness of 2 and 3 John is to say that these two do move together. It's love in truth. It's truth in love. We love people through the truth because the truth matters and because people matter and because we're seeking to be faithful to both for the honor and the name of our God. The challenge of these books, we have to learn how to love and love in truth.